This last part is to introduce the idea of using a timer, the how to use the painting aspect of a panel. So how do we draw things on a panel? How do we do animation, that kind of thing. And also dealing slightly with interaction between two classes, the panel and the frame in this instance. Okay, so first of all, in terms of the drawing, we're going to take a look at the last one: demo timer and animation panel, demo timer and animation frame, and test timer. So if we look at the panel, again, it implements action listener. That's because that's the way that I wanted it to do it. The key thing is we have a timer and we have a refresh time in milliseconds. All these other things you can read and try to understand it. It creates a new speed. There's a circle, whether it's true or false. Here we have a timer. So a timer allows the computer to receive an action every certain number of milliseconds. So if you wanted an event happening every 10 milliseconds, we'd say 10. If you want it happening every second, it'd be 1,000 milliseconds. And we're going to use this as the action listener. We also need to start the timer. This means that every 10 milliseconds, in this case for me, every 10 milliseconds, it will serve as an event for this for the program to do something. And so the action performed, it gets the source if it is the timer, if it's an event from the timer. So if it's a ping from the timer, basically, it will do certain things and then it will repaint. What is repaint? Well, the idea of the repaint or the paint component class is to draw things on the screen. We've seen the paint component in both the Square game and in the assignment 3, the drawing graphs. Basically, every time we repaint, time something is painted, it will basically clear the screen and it will draw whatever you tell it to draw. Here, I tell it to draw a rectangle, and I use a variable for player X and player Y because over the course of this game, I want this person to be able to, change positions. So the player X and the player Y will be variable. It will change. That's why I don't put a specific number here. Now, if I don't want it always to draw something, I can put conditionals. So here I have a Boolean called circle. If circle is true, then I draw this, but if it's not, then I draw something else. This makes it so that you don't always have to draw everything on the screen. And if, for example, you want, let's say we have the game Mario, and you don't always draw the enemies on the screen. So depending on the position of the enemy, if the enemy is within the limits of the screen, we would say is visible is true, and then go through the array of enemies. If enemy is visible, then we're going to try to draw that enemy. That's an example of how this would work out. So there are some conditions you can create and use in order to draw something when you want it. So paint component is a method is written like this, and all panels have this. If you want to use it, go ahead. If you create a panel and it doesn't require these paint components, that's okay too. We've used panels as containers before to put different buttons and stuff. So that's the idea of painting. The idea of painting is we have a timer that kind of constantly sends an event, and that event calls it to paint. And in the paint method, it basically, this is our graphics G, and we're able to use G, the graphics, to draw different things, whether it's drawing image, all that stuff. How to use graphics, we've seen a little bit, but again, also Google it, how to draw an image, that kind of thing. If you're drawing characters on a video game, in a video game, probably you're looking at PNG files, basically files that have transparency so that you don't see squares moving around. So that's the idea. One quick note of organization. You can see that here I have the player X plus equal player direction, player Y, if blah blah blah. So this can get long again. If I organize it in one way or another, then if I organize it, it will be easier to read what happens for each timer. So for example, instead of putting it all here, I could create a new method called public void move player, and then I put all that stuff inside here. Now, why is this helpful? Well, then if every time the timer runs, or is, yeah, then I move player, and that's it. It's very easy to read. I just look at the action performed, and I can see, okay, they moved the player. Maybe move enemies, or calculate health, calculate time, or whatnot. Repaint, and then we can see what is drawn using the paint component. You can see that there's not very much organization in here at this point. There's just a lot of methods, and again, for each method, you are asked to put the comment above it. So here we don't have any parameter, we don't have any parameters, we don't have a return, so all you really need to say is the description. What is this method doing? Again, for the official documentation, you are looking for /** for the method comments. And for example, this one would be like to change the speed of the square. And so if I run this code, what you can see is the panel. So if you take a look at the frame, you can see that I've populated the buttons. So these two buttons here, I create a game panel, and then I place the components. So populate buttons, it does all this stuff, creates game panel, not much, and then I place the components. I add the game panel in the center, which is taking up all here, and the button panel, which is on the south. And yeah, so you can see the animation each time. And if you want to look at the math behind it, it's generally understandable. But if you have any specific questions, you could ask me, or you can also ask Google. So the last part is, how do we interact between the panel and the frame? So inside, let's say I have some buttons here that I want to be able to change something inside the panel. In this case, the way that I've programmed it is that the when I click, I've done the clicking button. I should name these better, but I've just copied and pasted all the previous ones. So action performed, if it's equal to circle, then I'm going to call. So I'm going to get the game panel to run the method, the flip circle. Again, we're going to learn more about this in grade 12. So if you don't understand this, that's perfectly fine for now. And so in flip circle, we see that the code is basically this, but because I've shortened it, I can just create. These two are equivalent. Why they're equivalent? Think it through. Basically, if it's false, I set it to true. If it's true, then I set it to false. So what I can see here is when I click the circle, it sends the action command as circle, and I call this method flip circle. So I click it, now it draws a circle. When I click it again, it turns circle to false, and we can see in the paint components, if the circle is true, if this boolean is true, then I draw the circle. If it's false, then I don't draw the circle. And here I can use a button to affect a value on the screen. So if you want to use buttons to affect your drawing, that's one way you can do it. Another thing that I did was to change the speed. So in my panel, I had player X and player Y, as well as the directions. And here I didn't set these values as a random value. I could have set the values as random, but because I knew I would probably use it again in some other capacity, I just put it in a method. I put the method here so that, you know, it would create a new speed. But also, now that I've made this method, I can also use it in my action event. So when I click the button that says to change speed, which is this button, it will change the speed. So I'm able to, whenever I click this button, I'm able to change the speed of this square. I've set it so that it's always positive, so that's just what I've done. But again, how you want it to change is up to you. One thing that's pretty cool about this is using the width and the height. So I kind of, again, you see a bug right now. It's not perfect, whatever. I use the width and the height of the panel. Those are things that I can use. Like I can get the width and the height of the panel, of the frame. Again, that's up to you to figure out what values these things have. Yeah, and so based on the size of this panel, I can make this panel bigger, and I can see that the square, it bounces based on the size of the panel, as well as the circle is always centered. Yeah, and that's based on these calculations that I've done here. So draw a circle, draw oval, sorry, get width divided by 2, all that stuff. So that's the idea of animation and timers. How you want to use it in your project, that is up to you. Good luck.